Welcome to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset, the leading data and analytics company for the cannabis industry.
All right, welcome back to the High Rise, a laid-back, data-backed conversation on all things cannabis, where we talk about cannabis MSOs, Canadian LPs, products, and market analysis. I am joined, as always, by Emily Paxia.
Hi, welcome to the High Rise.
And Matt Carnes.
Welcome back.
Great. Well, thanks for being here today. Again, my favorite week and my favorite topic here, cannabis. I know we've kind of alluded to a big week of news. I think last week and into this week, there's been a lot of earnings calls and some interesting strategic moves from a lot of these operators. So we'll dive into that. But before we get there, I want to talk a little bit about the legalization landscape here in the U.S. This is another topic we seem to cover week over week. I think things are constantly moving on this front. But one of the most notable things, I think, was that the Republicans actually introduced what's called the Common Sense Cannabis Reform for Veterans, Small Businesses, and Medical Professionals Act, sponsored by a few reps who happen to be Republican, one from Ohio, one from Alaska. And I think this is the first time we've seen this happen, from the other side. And, pretty interesting. I think it, to me, shows continued momentum. I'm not sure, the expectations around this actually getting through and happening, but just as a signal, I think it's pretty important. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just excited to see that the Republicans are stepping up because it is reflective of the sentiment of their constituents being an issue that pulls well on both sides of the aisle. So may as well get involved in the lawmaking process around it if it's something that people substantially want. I mean, we just saw Alabama pass a medical marijuana law this week, which is like just the velocity of change, as we say, is just extraordinary. But I'm pretty happy that they did this because it's a pretty moderate bill, or whatever it will be when it's done. But it's pretty moderate, and nothing is ever perfect in lawmaking, but it's kind of putting a stake in the ground. And I think, we have an idea of what Schumer is going to put forth. And I was a little bit worried that if that was the first thing to land, then it would be an action and then an extreme reaction to it. And instead what happened was a moderate kind of point got put in place first. And now we'll see what Schumer's got. And I'm hoping that what this means is we land somewhere that's actually maybe pretty good. So I don't know. I'm an optimist on this one. Kind of happy it happened. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. I think it's just a matter of, putting the stake in the ground and saying, hey, we're ready to come to the table type of thing. I don't know, I mean, obviously there's a lot of things that were not included. It sounds more like a medical play than it would, address rec. And I don't think, a pure medical play would be, really advantageous to the industry. Yeah. But, like we said, it's just a starting point. So. Yeah. All good.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And the Alabama news is huge. Thanks for bringing that up. I can't use Alabama anymore as kind of a state that I would point to when we talk about what federal legalization would look like. And we could say, well, some states may choose not to legalize completely, states like Alabama, and I cannot say that anymore. And again, it's just a great signal. It's really becoming more or less bipartisan issue. And you get, maybe there's some nuanced differences in approach. I think we're going to see probably a very different measure from Schumer's camp, really, when that comes out than this. But, at least, there's a flag in the ground. They can kind of start to try and anchor it one way. Democrats can anchor it another way. And hopefully somewhere in the middle is what we get. And we actually have some progress here.
Yeah. I mean, it's glaring that it's missing the equity considerations, but we know Schumer's bill will include that. So again, I'm hoping that then we net out with it something in there that's reflective of it. And let's face it, we're going to have to tackle this issue on the local levels anyway. So that's really important. And just my last thought on the Alabama thing is I can't help but just think back to when Jeff Sessions rolled, back the Cole memo and everything. And I'm just like, put that in your pipe and smoke it, buddy.
Exactly. But it's unfortunate because Mississippi, now they want to roll that or take that away. And, I was pretty psyched the fact that Mississippi, was able to pass it. And I don't know. I think, maybe they just want to keep it to one type of weed, and that's in the University of Mississippi. And that's all they want to experience or smell anyway.
Yeah. I know, Sai, before you got on, Matt and I were talking about what a bum out government weed is. Like, what a horrible. It's like, could you think of anything drier and less fun? Anyway.
Oh, it's just the worst. I know you see some of those pictures, especially all the innovation that's happened over the years since they implemented that program. And
Yeah.
it couldn't be any different. It's almost a different product completely.
Completely.
So,
Yeah.
like, why bother?
Why bother? Exactly.
Just buy the good stuff and test it. Anyway.
That's right. That's right. Schumer, continues to talk about it as well. I think just last week, still signaling it's coming soon. So wait and see. And I think you're right. The social equity component is going to be a big piece of it. Personally, I've been in the industry for a decade, and when I got in, not really understanding the impact that prohibition has had, with criminalization. And so it is a very important piece of fixing this stuff. And as states have rolled out, like, I'm here in Washington State, and, one of the first was Colorado, and there wasn't any sort of provisions built in. I think it was just really exciting to get something across the line. They needed a starting point. And you see states now coming in and thinking about it first, like, New York, with the MRTA and implementing that, and, really looking at social equity as an important piece of it and trying to figure out, how to do it. So hopefully, the Republican side with this bill, I know it's excluded. It's probably going to be a sensitive subject for that side. But hopefully we see something, because it really is like a big piece of it. And I think the closer you are to the category, the more you learn about it, the more you realize that that's the fact. And so I'm optimistic we'll get somewhere, and I'm really looking forward to seeing what Schumer puts forward, and hoping that can get across the line.
Yep, I agree.
Yep.
So this week was, as far as earnings calls, this week and last week, I think there's been a lot of news. And so let's spend a good chunk of time there, starting in the U.S. With the MSOs and the earnings calls, what we're learning about these different businesses and how they're performing. Lot to cover. So why don't we start with GTI and where they're at, what they talked about. Does anybody want to chime in on that?
I mean, GTI hit it out of the park, really, with a great year-over-year and quarter-over-quarter sequential growth. And but what was really striking to me was the strength of their balance sheet and the focus on really being efficient with their capital and preserving shareholder value. That has not been the case a lot of the times with the Canadian LPs. And so I feel like this is more of the US story. It feels a lot more like how Buffett and Munger approach things. And I think, some people knock them now because it's, they kind of look at them as an older generation. But I think there's a lot of wisdom to that. And preserving shareholder value is something that should not be ignored, especially as we are going to go into a rapid growth cycle again. But I think that the way they've really focused, Anthony Georgiadis, the CFO over there, very prudent guy. And I think he really thinks about how they bolster their balance sheet for the more opportunities to come, and think about judiciously deploying that capital for growth. So I think it's a wise strategy, especially as we've seen the markets kind of since the end of February contract around cannabis. And, Morgan always talks about how this industry is a G.A.R.P story, a growth at a reasonable price story. And I think we're really, really getting into that space. But yeah, I would say that was my big takeaway from GTI. I loved how Matt McGinley kind of called it like a wonderfully boring quarter, which is like the idea of having no drama in a business. I mean, of course, under the surface, there's always drama in business, but like on the big levels, it's like they're just heads down executing, and that's what we got to do.
Absolutely. I totally agree with that. And, just their ability to generate cash, and the way that they, are very disciplined with how they allocate the cash. And they're one of the few MSOs that generate enough cash. I think I talked about this before, that generate enough cash to pay this enormous tax bill, in addition to sustaining all the costs of prohibition. And I just think, is most of all the companies, it's, sort of the same theme. Everybody's jockeying for this leadership position. Everybody's integrating. This is 2.0. They're integrating, as opposed to, earlier on, it was acquire and then liquidate. Now it's prudently acquire and integrate. Is that what? Yeah, that's.
Yep.
How I see.
Yeah.
And,
and Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And I think focusing on lowering their cost of capital, I think we've talked about this before, but getting that loan restructured down to 7% with the warrants, and then they have a no prepayment penalty, so they could theoretically refinance that as rates come down. And I think that all of those things, it's just all money through to the bottom line and improves the way that you run your business.
And not everybody could do that. It's not like, oh, okay, well, you know what? They're going to set the tone and 10 other MSOs are going to be able to do that. They're very unique. So I think, the stock price should be reflective of how well they're executing. And like I say, everybody's gunning and nobody's iceberg, maybe a couple stragglers, but, we're going straight ahead. So.
Yep.
How about the playlist? That's what everyone's going to be talking about on the GTI calls.
That's the only reason I tune in.
That's right. Anything notable on there? Can we find it on Spotify yet? What's the deal?
So Rosie and I talked about that. I think they're going to have a GTI earnings call Spotify.
No kidding.
Yes.
Oh, I love that.
Because actually, so the other one I really liked was the last quarter was a lot of really good reggae music. It was great. So this one was a little more like groovy, jammy kind of stuff.
Wasn't just all burner for the cookies store launch.
No.
Last quarter, I really thought that I clicked on the wrong link when I think it was the Dead I was listening to.
Yeah, the Dead shows up. Yeah, there was some jammy
this is
stuff.
Cannabis. This is the cannabis industry. Of course, they're going to play the Dead or reggae or whatever.
If we can't do fun things, what are we doing?
Right, exactly. It's a big business industry, but it's the cannabis industry. Let's have some fun from time to time.
Right.
Great. Well, on to Curaleaf, the next one. So again, these big numbers are posting plenty of good growth on the board. I think $260 million, 170% year over year. This stuff is hard to follow with all these acquisitions and bringing in and tracking where this growth is coming from. But one interesting thing that kind of happened last week was their announcement of the acquisition of an outdoor purchase in Colorado. Outdoor, I think about 66 acres with some indoor and a couple retail locations. So this is an interesting bet, I think, from Curaleaf in Colorado. It seems to be, at least some of the talking points have been around preparing for interstate commerce. This is their play to have a position where they can grow at a cost-effective rate, particularly outdoor. Colorado gets cold, which maybe we can talk about. But trying to get the price per pound in sub $100 is what they're thinking. It seems to be a bet. I know Curaleaf has made a lot of different bets, between their CPG bet with the Select brand and stuff, we've touched on before, and trying to scale out, CPG brands, but at the same time in other markets, really focusing on their retailer arm. Now looking at, interstate commerce that, could potentially be something, although may not be something for the foreseeable future. So any thoughts, any comments on Curaleaf here, whether earnings or this kind of announcement?
One thing I would say, if you're one of those small mom and pops in Colorado, or probably pretty much anywhere at some point, if somebody offers you a buyout, a takeout, I would go for it, because it's going to be really hard to compete with a big kahuna like Curaleaf for any of the big MSOs. So if you're marginally okay right now, I would just, give me a call or whoever, because it's time to go. Party's almost over. But, in terms of that strategy, it's pretty much a mature market. But yeah, to the point of interstate commerce, I think there's, a lot that has to be worked out around interstate commerce, and particularly testing a product. Will one state allow product that was tested in one way? All that type of stuff. So I don't know, a lot to think about and work through.
Yeah, I mean, Boris has been talking about interstate commerce for a few years now. I mean, it's he's building for it to come, and it's interesting because you see kind of lower multiples and lower kind of growth rates out of these more mature markets. But at the same time, I mean, Sai, you know the data better than I do. Colorado grew at, I just saw you post this morning, from 19 to 20 and 20 to 21 sequentially in Q1. It was like 20 and 24%, right?
Yeah,
year over year,
20%. Yeah. And this is for a market that is, they opened in 2014.
Yeah,
so
7 years old.
And to see that kind of growth still happening in
Exactly.
a relatively low population. And we're in a world where tourism is limited. Colorado, like the ski season, all that stuff has been, hampered by the pandemic, and still, even before interstate commerce, it could be a very long bet, right? Like interstate, when does it come? What does that look like? It could be so far off, but in the interim, there's a market in Colorado and money to be made in Colorado. So maybe that's how they're looking at it.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of give credit to the operators that are starting to look west a little bit because they understand that they're selling ice in the desert on the East Coast. But like, if you jump into California or Colorado or Oregon, you're basically you're heli skiing down a quadruple black diamond, and then when you get down to the green circles, you're gonna be like, we got this. So you might as well like kind of do a little playing in the more competitive markets, because it'll just set you up for, as the competition continues to increase, you're just learning more and more about it. So I don't know. I would say that's more the wisdom to me in kind of risking to get. I don't think the market pays as much on the multiples on those markets, because I don't think a market's as savvy to understand how quickly or how much those markets are still growing. And they love the juice of the East Coast markets with the limited license, because you can really control the pricing dynamics. But I think it's just a different animal, and I think I'm going to give them a little credit for that on the forward-looking nature of it. So not the interstate. I'm still I still think we've got a ways to go before you see that payout, but. He's putting his Curaleaf has always, it's very different from some other MSOs, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. They've gone wide. I mean, they even put down a stake in Europe. So they're clearly putting their chess pieces on a big map.
Ice in the desert. That's a good one. Yeah. It's true, though, in a lot of ways, right? And you're right. Like, to go to these competitive markets, California, Colorado, Washington, even Nevada, some of the older ones is can you make it there? Can you be successful there? I think California, we're going to see more and more, it looks like, from the MSO perspective coming in.
That's right.
All right, next, let's talk about Trulieve. Similar, actually, I think their earnings dollar amount was the same as GTI, like 194, which is funny. They both came in at the same number. But beyond kind of the earnings, I think what's interesting is the Harvest deal. That was a $2 billion deal. Sounds like it was all stock. Gives Trulieve, more of a footprint in the U.S., particularly the Southwest, with some of the stuff happening in Arizona with Harvest. But Harvest does have licenses in markets like Pennsylvania, and we've touched on Pennsylvania before and kind of this aggressive growth that's happening out there from the different, investments in, snatching up retailers or dispensaries, different licenses. One thing that is interesting about this is that they do hit the license cap ceiling in Pennsylvania with this deal, and I don't know how this is going to play out. I think in Pennsylvania the rule is you can have up to 5 licenses, and you can have 3 locations per license, so 15 licenses. And I do believe Trulieve is either there or close to there already, so I'm not sure how Harvest plays into it. I do think that this happened to them in Florida, which is where they started, and they were able to expand on those licenses. So maybe they're betting on the ability to do that, or maybe that Pennsylvania is just a piece of it, but they're really looking at the national footprint. But it was a pretty big deal. I mean, a $2 billion deal. Is this one of the largest deals that we've seen from an MSO perspective? And does this set them up to be the largest, or is Curaleaf still kind of carrying that banner? What's this looking like?
I mean, I just think we're still so early, and yes, they're the biggest now, but like next week, because we were talking about the last time we spoke, we were talking about Tilray and Afria. Does this mean that these guys? And I'm thinking, well, maybe this week it does, but like anything could happen at any time. One thing I'm really looking forward to: the more consolidation, the less number of earnings reports and calls to be on. Because
unless they all have great soundtracks like GTA.
Yeah, exactly. But I would just love like 5 earnings calls. That's it. It's gonna be a while, but it's darn, it's a lot. But it is. But yeah, I just think it's smart what they're doing. It's complementary. The other thing is, we don't know in Florida. I mean, there was they started with the ballot initiative in Florida for rec, and then they put the kibosh on it because they're not really pro cannabis in Florida for rec. So like, you didn't do it right. You got to do it over to get the signatures. So will that pause some of the anticipated rec revenues coming out of Florida? At least it's hedged now with or not hedge, but you have a replacement sort of, coming out of Arizona.
I think, I mean, good, by the way, it's cool that we have a female MSO leader who is now top one or two MSO in the country. I think the harvest deal is interesting. As we were talking about, it's all stock, so there's something to that. And Trulieve stock is lower than it had been, so it's a good deal for harvest, in my opinion. And I'm sure there's a lot of work to be done because I think those harvest assets were not exactly. I just think there's a lot of work to be done on this combination because it's a heavy lift. I think it's interesting because she picks up Arizona in a big way on this one. And I've been wondering when she would make a play in Arizona because I think of Arizona as kind of the Florida of the West. And so she's kind of gotten her to there's a heavy retirement community. There's a lot of similar demographics. I think it's a good one for her because she can extrapolate from her. We were talking about this a few episodes ago about how do you extrapolate Florida consumer behaviors into the rest of the country, which is really different. But I do think Arizona is a pretty close cousin to Florida. So yeah, it's a big move and I think a bold one. And I do think that this is the era of M&A. And I mean, frankly, I probably wouldn't have even listened to the harvest earnings call. I just kind of don't at a certain point on some of these operators, but so I'm not exactly benefiting from the drop off of that one. But I think it will be interesting to see how this is going to be a huge execution move to see how this goes because it's a big combination. We'll see what happens.
Who do we think is next? Is there I think we'll see something from. I mean, does everyone respond to this, or is it just kind of like a one-off and we don't see any more? Or
I think like as Ben Kovler said, he's like I'm going to listen to everything, right? I think whatever makes sense, so or entertain whatever. So everybody's probably obviously doing that. I would if I was running one of these companies.
Take the meeting.
Yeah, that's right. Be at the table. Okay, TerraSend, another one.
They're all going to need headset regardless.
That's right. There we go. I love it. And a word from our sponsor. So TerraSend's the next one. Emily, you were mentioning that this is a pretty strong U.S. story with some Canada exposure. Do you want to kind of go into some detail on what you're thinking about with what TerraSend covered?
Yeah. So I like TerraSend. I think Jason Wild is a super savvy guy, and I like the team. I like that they talk about taking a winger. They, acquired Apothecarium, a very well-known California retail brand back a couple years ago. And I feel like that was a forward-looking move. But what I think is super smart about that is that they took the retail model and brought it to the East Coast. And if anyone's ever been into an Apothecarium, it was one of the defining retail brands. There's Spark and Apothecarium were like two of the leaders. Buds and Roses down in LA. Those were some of the OG, forward-thinking retail guys and ladies. And so I think it's great that they did that. And they actually just opened an Apothecarium in Maplewood, New Jersey, which I've spent a fair amount of time in Maplewood, New Jersey. And it's really cool to see an Apothecarium back there. It's just like this wild experience to have seen Jason Wild experience. So they, cut the ribbon on that and it was pretty cool. But the earnings were good in the US. It was good sequential growth again. Like, I think that's the thing is like, we're seeing that the MSOs are they're executing in general. Like they were good news updates and the market was kind of like, there's just no one at the table to trade these names, which is a disappointment, especially after the Wasatch conundrum and the Credit Suisse issue. But I think that the important thing is these guys did well. I think that TerraSend, the one thing that they're going to maybe get a discount for their efforts on is that they've got the Canadian exposure, and Canada is no longer, I would say, the darling of the investment landscape here in the US. I think really Canada benefits just because they get to be listed on the exchanges, whereas the rest of the operators do not. But anyway, that's just one thing I'm thinking. And, I think that TerraSend has some good assets in some key markets like Pennsylvania and New Jersey.
Speaking of, one ascend to another. So moving on from TerraSend to just Ascend Wellness. So this week was our first earnings call. Is that accurate?
That's correct. It IPO'd on May 4th. May the 4th be with them, and had their earnings call on May 18th. It was pretty exciting and quick turn. So, Matt, do you want to say your thoughts on this one?
Well, I would just say that that they really know how to manage street expectations, and they really did a great job in their out of the gate their presentation. I mean, it's obvious, that he knows how to, work the street, and I thought they were very clear, very articulate, and very the disclosures and the transparency I was impressed with. I have not done my thing yet with my calculator and whipping through the 10 Qs, 10Q, but I will. But I'm sure, that they're doing everything and better, than they set forth to do. So, but it's believe me, I remember, when 2 or 3 years ago when we first had these public companies, it was like really nerve wracking. I don't want to name names, but it's like, oh my God, now, there's more, obviously there are more analysts. You got to be able to communicate your message and your story effectively. And I think that they're definitely going to do that. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Ascend differs from, say, Curaleaf in that their slogan, Abner always says, we go deep, not wide. And, we used to say, we go deep to ascend. And, we're focused on really getting key assets in a smaller number of states, probably getting those flagship locations like the Manhattan location, the Friend Street, downtown Boston location. And those are the big strategic moves that company is playing. So you can start to see these businesses are taking different strategic approaches, and I think that's what's going to make this market really interesting to watch as it goes. So I'd say they had a great first earnings call. They got a lot of great questions from the analysts, and they even gave some guidance, which is not always what happens in this industry, but they had some good reasoning for why they felt comfortable doing it based on what they knew was opening in these markets, and they'd already been licensed. They weren't waiting for certain things that can really blow up your pro forma projections. So that was why they felt comfortable. Yeah,
they did this going in knowing that it's achievable. Because they know how to manage the street, whereas it's not. Sometimes we've heard from companies, well, we think we could do this, and then it doesn't happen.
Yeah, they felt pretty comfortable doing it. We talked about it too, but I think it was a good move. Yeah.
Emily, you mentioned Apothecary. I mean, that's a California brand originally, moving out to the East Coast, and I think that sounds very familiar when you think about organizations like the parent company or Glass House and this positioning of, things start in California and they spread, from there, particularly around the cannabis industry. And that's kind of their thesis in a lot of ways. And this week, we saw some news coming out from both of those organizations, the parent company and the Glass House, with the parent company making a $50 million equity investment into Glass House, or through the Mercer Park Brand Acquisition Corp. And Matt, I know this week you covered you did some stuff on SPACs that you mentioned on our last podcast, and I know that there's representation there. So certainly would love to hear your thoughts on this. To me, it's quite interesting. Like on paper, I feel like the parent company and Glass House have both positioned themselves to be quite competitive in the market. Especially with some of their premium, products and kind of how they're thinking about the world. Like parent company's Monogram, Jay-Z's Monogram, high-end cannabis product, and Glass House as a top-selling flower brand. But I understand, they need retail distribution, and the parent company has Caliva and their delivery network, as well as the brick and mortar. And Glass House has a few locations as well, I think under the pharmacy brand. And so there is that push and pull of they need to work together because they need to get shelf space, they need to get that distribution. They obviously need to get supply, which I think is a big part of this investment. But ultimately, they would be competitive. Like consumers would choose between maybe one brand or the other when they purchase. But maybe they don't see the world like that, and maybe cannabis isn't like that. It's I think one of the nuances with this vertical integration that we're seeing. So, what does this look like? Does this mean that they're just destined to come together as one larger company? Is this to get that retail distribution, to get the production? What do you guys think?
Well, to me, they're both they're pretty much out of the gate. So it's like being in high school and then seeing if you could live together first before you get married. So it's, very premature, pretty early, but, clearly these are really big powerhouses. I mean, they, in the industry, and coming together in a big state like California, That's, $7+ billion. I mean, I don't think it's unreasonable to see, it's a wait and see how they work together, and who knows, maybe this is just a foreshadow for, we don't know. But all I could say is, if I was, like I said, in Colorado, if I was a little guy, I'd be getting out of there. There's a steamroller coming through. It's, I don't know, but it's interesting. So,
Yeah. I mean, California is a really hard market. There's no way around it. It's extremely difficult to make it here. And I think if two companies that are as big as they are have to kind of join forces to tackle this market, I think it just says how difficult it can be. But, both companies are also really kind of, they're early. They're early in this, but I do think it's been such SPAC mania, and then to see a SPAC onto a SPAC, like SPAC-on-SPAC action, like, what are we doing? It's like, I don't know where we're going next.
Well, a de-SPAC, a re-SPAC.
SPAC, yeah. My friend Greg says that SPACs are like belly buttons. Everyone's got them. But, now the whole problem is, what do you do with them? So they're kind of useless, like a belly button. No, I'm just kidding. People have done good things. And the guys behind Mercer Park are pretty savvy SPAC guys, like Matthew Sandelman? Yeah. And what's his name? Jamie Mendola.
Yeah.
John Sandelman. I was thinking of someone else. John Sandelman and what's his name? Jamie Mendola. Good friend and colleague.
Event, the Green Wave event, right, Matt?
Pardon me?
Smart.
Yeah,
Jamie
they were on our SPAC, our inaugural SPAC.
This week, the day they announced that.
I'm
sure he's fielding a lot of texts while presenting on the panel there.
I think, Jamie Mendola is probably one of the smartest people I know in the SPAC space, because he ran a SPAC fund. He knows what's up. Yeah,
they're incredibly bright. They know what they don't know. There's, that's like another thing. I mean, I can't help but to think you have Glass House and you have Air, and both under the sort of the same parental control, sort of. And so, I don't know. Well,
I'm kidding.
No, that's good. I like that. So,
I'm sure the parent company.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Always interesting, always so much to cover. And I think that'll wrap it up for this week. I'm sure next week we'll have just as much to touch on, all the SPAC-on-SPAC action at once. But thanks again, Emily and Matt. Always love this conversation, and looking forward to seeing you guys next week.
Likewise. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the High Rise Podcast, presented by Headset. For more information on Headset, visit headset.io.